Hi guys, so let's do some puzzles. So let's go to lichess.org. They have some great free puzzles. So if you click puzzles and puzzles, not the other four options, so it moves you straight away into puzzle mode. So I'm gonna give you a little overview of what puzzles are. So obviously you have some information about the puzzle here. The rating is typically hidden. So that's done not to discourage you from solving it, because if you see a big number, you think it's too hard to solve. And then from which game is it taken, the position? So it's from a real game played on lichess.org. Your current puzzle rating, which is by default when you start solving them, is 1500. Puzzles themes. So this information you see when you are working on your desktop. So I believe you don't see this when, particularly in this format, when you are on your mobile. So it's much more information when you're on desktop or iPad. So if you click puzzle themes, it will give you a very good idea of the scope of tactics. So lichess.org has around 1.9 million puzzles taken from games, from actual games. So I typically solve this one, so healthy mix. So all of the puzzles, I don't know from which phase or what's the motive in the puzzle. I don't know what to expect. There are advanced motives as well. It could be mate in 1, mate in 2, mate in 3, back rank mate. I have no idea what it's going to be. So my goal is to figure out later on what's the motive. But for starters, there is no problem at all with starting some simple puzzles like mate in 1. Actually, this first video, I've decided to make it about mate in 1, especially for beginner players or those who haven't had much experience with puzzles, because mate in 1 is actually a building block of all of the puzzles. That's the ultimate goal of playing chess, to deliver a checkmate and win the game. And despite what some players might feel, there is a wide variety of ways to deliver mate, with a pawn, with a promotion, with any piece except the king, if we're not talking about discovered check, of course. So this is a very crucial, important building block, and that's what I believe we should start with. So let's do some puzzles with mate in 1. So you also see that there are other areas that you can click on. So later on, when we'll do a little bit more tactics, we'll see our puzzle dashboard. So how many puzzles have we done in 30, 60, 90 days, whatever period that you choose. And it also can show you improvement areas, so the ideas that you typically miss. It also shows your strengths, so where the areas where you perform the best. So it's good to know, it's good to understand your strengths and weaknesses. Puzzle history, a review of what happens, and also if you click from my games, then you will see which puzzles lichess.org derived from your games. So it will be quite interesting to see were there any tactics that lichess.org considers interesting in your personal games. So let's go back to mate in 1 puzzles. As I said, essentially building block. I believe I've done maybe 2,000 or 3,000 mate in 1s. before doing the actual puzzles, and then maybe 500 or 1000 of mate in 2. So let's start. Okay, so how do you solve mate in 1? You actually have to identify all of the possible checks, after which the opponent's king does not have a square to retreat. Okay, so possible checks are with the knight on f2 and c5. Then we can check with the queen by taking the rook, checking on c4, checking on b5, checking on a6. We can also take the knight on d4. Okay, so we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 possible moves. Okay, so the issue with this check is that the king can retreat to one of these fields. This square is no longer under attack. If the knight checks here, likewise, if we deliver a check with a knight over here on f2, the king can retreat to one of these fields. Okay, so the only other piece that can checkmate is the queen. Check on b5, we will be captured by either of these pieces. And check on a6, one of these pieces will defend, so we won't deliver a checkmate in 1. So the only thing that we have to do, so we eliminated these fields, we eliminated the checkmates possible by a knight. So the only field that is left is delivering a checkmate on c4. Okay, so the last move was by the rook from h8 to e8. Again, we need to identify all of the possible checks. If you watched my video on the approach to solving more difficult puzzles, I've stated that, well, and it's common sense and common knowledge that we need to identify candidate moves in the order of checks, captures, and threats. So being able to identify every possible check is extremely necessary skill in solving chess puzzles. So besides all of the benefits that I've described in the beginning of the video, it will help you to solve more difficult puzzles eventually, and also will help in practical play, especially in a fast bullet or blitz games. Okay, so here we can deliver checks only by one piece, by a knight, and we can either move it to f7 or e6. So the difference will be is that if we move it to f7, then the king has a c7 square to escape. Therefore, by elimination, we can checkmate on e6 because these two squares are under control of the knight. So, and the king has no place to go, so it's a checkmate. Okay. So again, trying to identify all of the possible checks. The king is on a dark square, therefore we can only perform a check with the knight, and the knight can check the white king from e6 or h7. So two possible checks. We need to eliminate one of these. So if we go on e6, the issue is that, so currently if you see, the white king does not have any legal move. If it was white's move, then they couldn't move the king. Ideally, we would need a check from one of the fields to deliver a checkmate. But the issue is, if we check on e6, the knight itself, it blocks its own bishop, and therefore the king will be able to escape to f7 and g8. Okay, again, by elimination, two possible checks. This one, e6 in h7, therefore we deliver the checkmate on h7. Now, as you can see, the king still has no place to go. These fields are controlled by the bishop, and according to the rules of chess, kings cannot be on the adjacent squares. Okay, so these two are controlled by the opposing king. So therefore we deliver the check, it's a checkmate. Okay. So again, start with which pieces can deliver a check. So in this case, it's the bishop and the queen. So rooks cannot deliver a check in any possible scenario in one move. So therefore, let's identify all of the possible checks by the bishop. It's a check on e2 or h3. With the queen, there are quite a number of checks: e2, e1, f2, f3, f4, g1, d3. Also, we can take the rook on c1. So here, of course, by elimination, you will be able to find the correct move, but a lot of these checks they don't have much sense, because, for example, if we take the rook here, we will be recaptured by a rook, so it's not mate in one already. So it has to be a check where we are not captured. So as you can see, the current position of the king is that they cannot move to these squares, so they can only move on one square, which is g2. And we can deliver a check through this diagonal by a bishop, and therefore we will eliminate the last field. They don't have any piece to put in between on g2. For example, if the queen was on b7, then they would retreat it on to g2 after a check on h3. So therefore, this is going to be the mate. Okay. So let's have a look again. What are the squares available to the black king? e8, b8, b7 is not available because it's under attack by the queen. And it's also under attack by pawn on a6. So therefore, we need to deliver a check. Possible check is taking with the bishop the rook. However, we will be recaptured instantly by the queen or the king. That's not going to be a mate in one. There is another check on b7 and on a8. The difference is if we deliver on b7, then the king retreats to e8. So therefore, by elimination again, it's a mate on a8. Okay. Typical mate in 1. Again, let's have a look. White cannot move on these squares because they are attacked by a knight. This is controlled by the king. So therefore, and this one is controlled by the rook. So therefore, we can actually mate from this field by a rook, because it still controls the second rank. Okay, possible checks. 1, 2, 3. And then we can also perform a check on g7. We can also retreat the bishop to on this diagonal, on this diagonal. So we need to decide quite a few number of fields. So ideally, most of the time you need to keep active pieces on the same places, because they are doing an excellent job. And I think sometimes in puzzles you will see that, you know, because this rook is wonderful. It controls the G file. It's doing a lot of work. And it's actually takes 3 fields from the king. Okay, so if we retreat the black square bishop, then the G file will be controlled, and there is going to be a discovered check by queen on H file. So we just need to identify where to move the bishop. So we can actually move it to anywhere apart from these 2 fields. The reason being because we will interfere with the rook. So if we move it to g5, then the king can escape, despite the discovered check, can escape to g file. So we won't do that. Likewise, if we check on g7, the king will escape to g8. So let's check anywhere apart from these 2 fields. Okay. So these fields are controlled by a pawn and by a queen. So actually we need to deliver any check that will keep under control these fields, and because we don't have any other piece that can deliver a check, there are actually only 4 checks available: queen on h7, g7, f8, f6. So h7 they will simply recapture. f8 is protected by a queen on b4. g7 will be recaptured by the king. So therefore there is only 1 field on f6. Quite a nice mate, quite typical for blitz games. Okay, a very nice mate on f1. So we would have delivered the mate with a queen on h7, but the issue is that we cannot move it. So therefore we will, and I think it's the only check we have in this game. Okay. Let's go a little bit faster. Okay, rook d6. Okay, typical easy mate. All right, queen g5. Queen e1. Yep. Okay, this might be tricky. Queen d6. So the bishop controls this diagonal. So we don't need to worry about the king escaping to c3. Okay, typical mate. This rank will be controlled by the rook. It delivers a discovered check by the bishop when it moves away. So we need to keep control of this file. Okay, so practically any move. Okay, so we have a bishop here. So we need to deliver a check that will also take away these squares. Okay, this field is controlled, so we are going to deliver a checkmate from h8. So it's going to be a discovered check by bishop d5. We need to move the rook somewhere. But also keeping in mind g6 as an escape field. So the e file will be controlled by the other rook. So let's move it to h6. Okay, so other fields that would deliver a checkmate are also available. Okay. Okay. Possible checks. Knight to e2, other knight to e2, knight to h3, and that's it. So the two moves to e2, they will be recaptured by either the rook or the bishop. So by elimination, there is only one move that will deliver a checkmate. Okay, possible checks. So queen d1. Possible checks. 1 and 2. So two possible checks. So if we check on b2, then the king will escape to a1 by elimination. The mate is on e1. All right. Okay, so again, the mate will be delivered by the bishop most likely, by a discovered check, but we need to make sure that other fields are controlled and that the king does not recapture, does not capture the pawn on h4. So we can practically move to any field along this rank, this rook. Okay. So you see white is in quite a difficult position because their pawns are actually preventing the king to escape in case of some trouble. So what are the possible checks? One check by a pawn, and is that it? So just one possible check, that's going to be the checkmate. So that will be a very easy exercise. Okay, over here. So it looks like that the mate is going to be by the bishop. Of course, there are quite a number of checks by the queen, but you see this rank is protected. And then over here we will be taken by the king, over here by the bishop, on c2 by the king and by the queen. So we need to move somewhere the knight. Okay, checkmate. Okay, our knight is protected by a pawn. Okay. Queen d4 mate. Okay, these fields are blocked, so we can take the knight. Okay, interesting mate. bishop g4. Cannot capture the pawn, it's protected. Cannot capture the bishop, it's protected. And the g file is attacked by the rook. So, okay. Queen h8. Okay, queen d5, I think. Okay, so our rating is already 2100. We were just doing a number of mates in one. Okay, so possible check by the queen. Yep, so these fields are attacked. So queen h6. Quite a tricky mate. We can mate on g8 because we will not be captured by the knight because of the rook. Okay, mate in one. Okay, so knight to d5. Okay. The rook is attacking on the e file. Nowhere to go, so mate. Okay. Simple mate on f7. Knight to b6. Okay, quite a nice position because we are down significantly in material and there is a mate on c2. See? So the second rank is attacked by the rook. These fields are attacked by a knight and the pawn attacks this field. So all of these fields are taken and these fields are taken by its own pieces and pawns. Okay. The rook is unprotected, so we'll just capture it, mate. Okay, nowhere to go, so we need to find a quick mate attacking the f3 and g4 at the same time. Okay, typical move, typical tactical puzzle. Pawn, knight, rook. G7 is unprotected, bishop and the queen. Okay. We should take probably on E5 because this file will be protected by the, will be attacked by the rook. Oh, I made a mistake. So minus 94 straight away. So I made a mistake because I've done too many puzzles. The bishop is protected by E5. Bishop on E5 is protected by F6 pawn. So the mate is on H2. So this is what happens. A very simple mate in one, and I make a mistake because I've done too many puzzles and I forgot that the piece that I wanted to mate with is actually going to be recaptured by a pawn. Okay. All right, so it's a double check on E6. Mate. Okay, these fields are attacked. Mate on E6. Quite a typical mate on D6. F2. F7. Okay, pawns are helping us with the 6th rank, so we can deliver a checkmate over here. Okay, so queen d2. Queen h8. This field is controlled, so queen d8. Okay, just capture it. Okay, quite a nice mate on b8. Mate on b5. Okay, these fields are controlled, so we need to deliver a check from here. Okay, g7 probably. Yep. H2. Yep. Okay, so we have this bishop which controls the g pawn, so we can actually capture on h3 then. Yep, they cannot capture because of the bishop, so, and the king has no place to go.